What up, Wizards? It's Deb. Mtg, we like it in Magic, and today we're doing my favorite video. It's the top 10 sleepers in Innistrad Midnight Hunt. Let's go. I'm gonna level with you. It was tough to find some sleepers this time around because people are really hyped about this rotation because, you know, no more Thornable Drain. So that was a little much, and also we're going back to Innistrad, which is like an all-time fan favorite plane. So people are really stoked, and as a result, there's a lot of hype for this set, so it's tough to find sleepers. But even in this situation, there are going to be cards that either fly under the radar, or people are talking about them, but they're not taking them seriously enough. Just like you don't take seriously enough the liking and subscribing. Do that seriously, and do all of this stuff if you can. But anyway, I should probably go ahead and get started with my job. Let's talk some honorable mentions real quick before we get to the real list. At first, I wanted this slot to be Nebelgast Intruder, and the more I look at it, the more I realize it's just that frog wizard guy, but he has flying. You pay an extra mana for it. Is that good? Probably not great, but maybe in mono blue tempo. And then I was thinking, like, Dryad's Revival. That looks like a pretty cool card. You know, it's probably usable as like a one-of in some decks. It might be better than Balaged Recovery. I like the idea of getting back any card type. It's a cool card, but it's not, like, janky or bad enough. A lot of times the sleepers in the honorable mention is a card that, like, I'm pretty sure it's bad, but it's interesting. So kind of having a hard time finding an honorable mention for this video, and then I found Contortionist Troop. All right, now this fits the bill in that I'm pretty sure it's bad. It's probably not the best card, but it is cool to look at and think about, and it's pretty easy to miss when you're looking through the spoilers. Or maybe you do see it and you think it's just like an interesting draft playable, but no, I actually think this card has a lot of things going for it. First of all, it scales. That's the end of that sentence. I was going to say it scales well, but not necessarily. But it does scale, if nothing else. It helps you hit Coven almost no matter what, you know, power that you need to complete Coven. And then when you do complete Coven, it's kind of, look at it really, like, tilt your head really hard and look at it, and it kind of can be like a Luminarch Aspirant, right? Like, it doesn't trigger before your attack step, and that kind of sucks, but it still gives one of your creatures a +1/+1 counter every single turn. And that's kind of, it's not bad. You know, we have a card in Standard that does that, and it's kind of playable. And, like, you can play this on turn 2, just like an Aspirant. It's a 1/1, and it's probably not going to trigger on the next turn. Well, could you play a 1-drop, and you play this as a 1/1, and then next turn you play a creature with, like, 3 power or something. And suddenly you've got, this could work, it could, but it's probably not super reliable. That said, I do think that there's more to this card than we're giving it credit for right now. Probably not enough to see Standard play, but if you really twist yourself around, I'm trying to make a contortionist joke, you can see how this card might shine a little bit. Hey, sorry for talking to you about Contortionist Troop for like a full minute. I've actually got, believe it or not, a whole list of cards here that might have a decent shot at seeing real Standard play. So let's get started. With number 10, it's Diagraph Rebirth, because it's a 2-mana reanimation spell. All right, let's move on to the next thing. I'm just kidding. Again, you have to contort yourself a little bit to see this, but this kind of reminds me of a Dread Return. And me and Dread Return were like this, son. Just had some good times. A lot of fun with Dread Return. And again, this sort of is reminiscent of it. And if you can do anything half as broken as you could with a Dread Return, this card is going to do some really cool things. I mean, we've got sacrifice decks in Standard right now that make it fairly easy to sacrifice 2 or 3 creatures and make this cost 2 or 3 mana, which is pretty busted. Whether you cast Plumb the Forbidden, sacrifice some dudes, and maybe you reanimate one of the things that you just sacrificed. That whole play costs 4 mana. That's really cheap. Or you could also discard some stuff, sacrifice some other stuff, you know, self-mill yourself, and then by the end of it, you're plumbing the Forbidden for 2 mana, you're doing this for 2 mana, and for all that trouble, you're getting back, like, one of the biggest, dumbest, silliest, most terrifying creatures in Standard. So, like, there's a lot of different directions you could take a Golgari reanimation deck in Standard right now, and I think that they all hinge on this card, so probably has a decent chance of seeing at least some play. I also think it's really funny that she has a shovel. That tickles me. Usually on these reanimation spells, there's a wizard like, rise! And then, like, in the foreground, there's a zombie coming up out of the dirt. But now she just has a shovel, and that's comedy to me for some reason. But anyway, number 9 is Mask of Gristlebrand. And just like some of the other cards on this list already, and probably some of the other cards we'll talk about, I think this is another card that you have to, like, completely puppy dog. You have to just tilt your head all the way to the side because you don't understand anything. to see cards like Demonic Embrace when you see a Mask of Gristlebrand. I've compared these two cards before, and I know they're not exactly the same. Embrace gives a really nice stat boost that I wish you got off of a card like this, but this could still be sort of a game closer for a mono black aggro deck or something like that. And if they do kill your creature, it gives you back a little bit of value. That's not bad. And just like Demonic Embrace, you can effectively repeat this over and over. I guess that they could bust a Demonic Embrace and you could get it back. They can break this somehow. It doesn't have the same ability to come back. But unlike an Aura, if they kill your guy, you can still just suit something else up with the mask and draw more cards later, gain more life when you attack. It's just... it has the potential to be a pretty silly pseudo-finisher in certain aggro decks. Ultimately, I think the key here is the fact that when your creatures go mask off, you get to draw cards, right? Like, if your opponent does have a removal spell against your aggro deck, you at least get some more gas. Maybe you can replace the creature that just died, and then mask it up, like the next turn, and get to attacking. So that's really important value for an aggro deck, and I think this might be a little bit better than we think. But moving on to number 8. Been waiting to get to this one, because it's one of the cards that I gave the most crap to, I think, during spoiler season. I'm not sure exactly the words I used, but I'm pretty sure I made this card seem fairly useless. But ever since then, I've been thinking about Angelfire Ignition. Now, there's two very specific cards that make me think this card might actually have a home in some deck or another. The first is Bloodthirsty Adversary, right? This costs 3 mana, which is, lo and behold, exactly, the highest mana value kind of spell you can cast off of an adversary. So, like, on turn 5, or just later in the game, if you cast Bloodthirsty Adversary, you can play this out of your yard, and suddenly your adversary gets, like, really big and has haste and lifelink and stuff. It's not a bad play in and of itself, and the fact that this card has flashback is pretty sweet too. Being able to do it twice in the game is at least decent fuel. It's 4 +1/+1 counters on your dudes. If nothing else, like, the card has a lasting effect in the +1/+1 counters, which I like. But, I know it's not instant speed or anything, but it can still take a lot of people by surprise. I don't think your opponent accounts for +2/+2 forever. Plus, like, trample, lifelink, flying. Like, he gets a bunch of ridiculous abilities. I just don't think your opponent's going to start your turn assuming that you're going to have that. So I know it's not instant speed or anything, but you can really take advantage of a tapped out opponent with a card like this. But anyway, the other specific card that makes me think this could be playable somewhere or another is Velamicus Lorehold, right? Because this, first of all, can be I'm getting too excited, can be cast for free when you get it off the top of your library with a Velamicus. That's kind of dope. And then it goes to your graveyard, but you can cast it again with flashback. That's pretty cool too. But in the meantime, it puts 2 +1 counters on your Velamicus. Again, I'm a little excited about this interaction, but you're putting the Velamicus goes up to a 7/7, and then suddenly it can cast 7 drops off the top of your library. So, like, Alrund's Epiphany, just cast it off the top of your library because you put 2 +1/+1 counters on Velamicus. I guess Velamicus already has haste and stuff, but it does give it a couple of abilities it didn't already have. So, I don't know. I'm kind of excited for it in that deck. It's an interesting card when put into certain contexts. It doesn't look super good traditionally, but there are a couple of decks that might make the card sort of playable, so I'm a little more excited about it than I was a few days ago. And, I think that there are definitely situations where the card might help you turn the corner or get some extra gas. You like these car puns? Because number 7 is Heirloom Mirror. This card just looks so good to me, and no one is talking about it. Like, absolutely no one seems to care this card exists. I've said before, I think that it might go a long way towards replacing Mazemind's Home in these mono black lists. I know that it makes you discard a card, but now that we have some more reanimation tools in the format, we have some flashback stuff in the format, multiple ways to play out of the graveyard already and all that. So I just don't think that discarding cards is a big deal, and especially if you draw dead for a turn, you don't really mind discarding to get a fresh shot at a card. So that's sweet while it's the mirror, but then later it just transforms into a big guy. So it can kind of be a finisher in your mono black control deck, along with, your Planeswalkers and your Ebon Death and all that stuff. So I don't know, it just adds a little bit more dimension. It adds a threat to the mono black control deck while also adding a card that helps it churn through its deck a little bit faster and find the pieces that it needs, get that blood on the snow when it didn't already have it. So, there's just a lot of really cool things about Mirror that I'm not sure why more people aren't taking a look at it. Does that even count as a pun? Oh, it's close. Number 6 is Graveyard Trespasser. This is another card that I think I gave way too much crap to. during spoiler season, but now I have forgiven our trespassers. That was terrible. I'm so sorry. I do think that, like, looking at this card a little bit harder, though, has caused me to think some things, confusing thoughts. I'm questioning everything. It's not on that level. I will say, I think that originally I was not really caring enough about A, the ward on this card, and B, the life loss, the drain that it can get you, right? Because a 3-mana 3/3 that attacks for effectively 4 on the next turn, that has ward, discard a card, like, not the worst stats. And when it does flip over, it gets bigger, and then it drains 2 whenever it attacks, so long as there are cards for it to eat. And that's, like, actually really good. Like, that damage adds up super fast in a mono black aggro deck in just a couple of turns, where even if it doesn't, like, get through on attacks, like it gets blocked and survives or whatever, it still ends up doing, like, 3 to 5 extra damage over the course of a game. And, like, that is a ton, especially against other aggro decks where you're trying to keep your life total up but still be able to swing with your guys. Like, I don't know. I think there might be a little bit more to this card than we originally thought, or at least than I originally thought. I don't want to put you on the hook for this. You're better at this than I am, probably. Number 5 is Search Party Captain, which always finds a card when it ETBs. I'm pretty sure that's the flavor here, but it's a great looking card, and it's another one that I feel like I've just gushed about like twice during spoiler season already, but like nobody else. Everybody else is just like radio silence, crickets on this card, and I just think it's really pretty good in like Clarion Spirit decks that want to, play 2 spells a turn, which is difficult to do, especially when you start being in like top deck mode. But like Clarion Spirit creates flyers, which makes it a little bit easier to get in with enough creatures to actually lower this thing's casting cost to a decent level. Like, this can be a 1-mana 2/2 that draws a card. Even as a 2-mana 2/2 that draws a card, like, frankly, that's very good. So I really like that. It's also decent in, certain decks that just want to have some gas as the game goes on. Imagine a deck that's really heavy on 1-drops. It's going to be attacking with a lot of creatures. Well, it's going to empty its hand really fast too. So as long as you have enough Anthem effects like Paladin class or whatever, this can contribute to the board state by being like a 3/3 body and drawing you a card. I just think there's a lot to this. And even though it's probably not as good as some of the other drops you could be playing in mono whites, and maybe it gets squeezed out of that deck, I still think that there are enough, like, success cases for this card where it's just like 1 mana for a card in a body that it's probably worth at least experimenting with. The card looks good. Number 4 is Galvanic Iteration. I just think this card looks really solid. And again, I haven't heard too much discussion about it. This is one that people bring up every now and again, but I actually think it's more dangerous than we think it is to be able to copy spells more than once in a game. I mean, we already have like Teach by Example and Dual Strike, but those in some ways are narrow. The cool thing about Teach by Example is it can be played in mono red, it can be played in mono blue, and that's an interesting thing about the card, but aside from that, it's just like a basic spell copier. And then Dual Strike has restrictions on exactly what spells you can actually copy with it, right? Still a cool card. But in this case, this has absolutely no restrictions on what spell you can copy in the first place. Cost the same mana value, at least, as a Teach by Example. Goes in most of the same decks, and you can cast it again. So, like, whether you're copying an Alrund's Epiphany late in the game when you have the 10 mana, or the 9 mana if you foretold the Epiphany, that's good. But if you're just, like, recasting removal, like, I'm going to cast removal and then cast this out of my graveyard, double up the removal, like, that seems good enough. Maybe you're doubling up on a burn spell to just kill your opponent outright, like late in the game when you got some treasures laying around, a Goldspan Dragon or something, and you have enough mana, you can, like, Magma Opus copy it because you just have this laying around. Like, having this laying around in your graveyard is really sweet. And I haven't even talked about the ability to discard it without actually casting it, or self-mill it into your graveyard and do something big with it later in the game. So there's just so many, like, cool lines with this card, and combo potential even, that I think it's one of the biggest sleepers in the set, like, pretty easily. No one's talking about it. Or at least, again, we're not talking about it to the extent that I think we should be. This is actually a really exciting card from a lot of angles, whether you're a combo mage, control mage, whatever. I think there's a lot of cool things about this. But anyway, I'm moving on to the top 3. How are we there already? Jeez. Number 3 is a card that's probably not great. I'm going to go ahead and say this card's not great, but one of the definitions of a sleeper is a card that's waiting on other stuff to do big things. And I think that Ghoulcaller's Harvest is a pretty good example of that. And I'm calling it right now. The puns this video have been pretty weak. I apologize. But I'm calling it right now. I'm going with it. that there may be something a little bit later on in this format that just allows us to self-mill really, really efficiently. We already have some stuff that just came out in this set. And frankly, we had some stuff before that allows us to self-mill relatively efficiently. But what we really need is spells that just allow us to basically thunk our entire library into our graveyard and just like flip them over, just like whoosh, flip over our library into our graveyard. And then suddenly a card like Harvest becomes like an amazing combo piece, right? I could see some cool potential with this too, especially in Jund, where you have things like Zariel, the 4-mana Planeswalker. You can just +1 her and suddenly like all your things have haste. So you can just harvest and then get in immediately that turn. You can do the same thing with like First Day of Class, I think it's called, and it only costs you like a couple of mana. It costs you like, what, 4 mana to pull that play off? That's nothing in the, mid to late game. And as long as, again, you can self-mill yourself efficiently enough, this card could actually do some really, really cool things. So I don't think that it's going to be great day one of the format or anything, but I'm going to be trying it out. All I'm saying is keep your eye open for stuff that facilitates this card, because if we get enough cool self-mill tools, this could very easily be the finishing combo piece that we've been looking for. Number 2 is just a banger of a card. I've actually been wanting a card like this in Standard for a time. Let's take a look at Light Up the Night. I want to call it Light Up the Stage every single time I talk about this card, but this is actually sweet. It's just like a blaze, fireball effect of some kind. And I have just been wanting like a red and X, deal X damage to any target spell for what seems like a minute. Like no fancy stuff like Expansion, Explosion, Perforos's Intervention, which doesn't even really, it feels like it doesn't even count, as a fireball effect. But this is even better than like a blaze, on its front face, because it does X+1 damage. So it always does how much damage you put into the card, which means it's not a terrible removal spell in and of itself, but it can also go face late in the game. That's amazing. Again, think of all the mana that you have late in the game from like a Goldspan Dragon or something. Just go face and finish the game. But if it doesn't finish the game, or you have to use it as a removal spell the first time you cast it, all you gotta do is have like a Planeswalker or 2 laying around, and suddenly, with the 4 mana investment and some loyalty from your walkers, you're able to do that last 2, 3, 4 damage that you need to put the game away. I think that's actually really a lot better than people think it is. I know that loyalty from your walkers seems like a pretty high cost, and just having to have a walker in play in the first place seems like it's pretty steep, but I could definitely see play patterns late in the game where you play a walker for like 4 mana. Even 3 mana. We have 3 mana walkers in the format, Rowan, Will, and stuff. But let's say you play a walker for 4 mana, you plus it goes to like 5 or 6 loyalty, and then you just go ahead and light up the night. I was going to say stage. You light up the night out of your yard that same turn and finish the game or whatever. Like, there are a lot of play patterns with this that I really like. Much less, again, the fact just ripping it off the top of your library on turn 9 and killing your opponent. You take 6 and die? Like, yeah. It's been a long time since I've been able to do that in Standard. Now, you can do it twice in a game on the same card. I just really like this thing. Why aren't you talk about this card with your friends? Go to them and be like, hey, have you guys seen Light Up the Night? What do you think about it? Just talk. Can we get a discussion started about this card? Because I think it's really good. But number 1 is another one of those cards that I've seen people talk about, but I just don't think we're taking seriously enough. And really, like, the only person I've seen talk about this card is Jim Davis. And when Jim Davis is talking about a card, you should probably pay attention. He's really good. If you don't know who he is, he's a very good Magic player. But number 1 is Smoldering Egg. This looks awesome. Seriously, can't wait to crack some heads and scramble some brains with this thing. Honestly, it looks kind of tough to get this thing procced, but I think it's actually over easy. I'll stop. I apologize, everybody. But let's look at the sunny side of this card. God, stop it. You gotta quit. I'm probably poaching puns from other people. I've got to stop. It's an egg. I can't help. I can't stop myself. But anyway, let's calm down and get serious about the card. I actually think it's fairly easy to make this thing go off. Like, it kind of reminds me of a Thing in the Ice. I will not stop making that that comparison. I don't care how silly it sounds. The card is actually really sweet. It flips over into a 4/4 flying gutter snipe. Like, what else do you want out of your magic cards but that? And then, like, in the meantime, it blocks fairly well. It doesn't die to most of the damage base removal in the format, which is pretty sweet. And you'd be surprised how quickly you can get to 7 counters on this. It counts the mana. It counts the mana that you spent on the spell rather than the mana value. Keep that in mind too. So, you know, when you pay a higher cost for flashback on a spell, it'll actually factor in the fact that you paid like 4 mana for the flashback, whereas the mana value for the spell is 2 mana. Right? So I think that's an interesting like way the card is worded that helps you get to the requisite number of counters. And if you just cast like an Alrund's Epiphany with this thing out, you're probably going to flip it. And then you're going to have a whole fresh turn with fresh mana and spells in your hand to start just like slinging stuff and killing them with this thing's ability. It's just like a hell of a magic card. I'm pretty sure this is like actually one of the strongest cards in the set, and I am super surprised that more people aren't zeroing in on this thing. I think I've seen way more many people say this card is bad than it is good, which is crazy to me because it really shouldn't be a hard shell. I'll stop. I've got to. Why can't I stop? It should be easy enough. But anyway, the card looks very... It's a good-looking magic card. But anyway, I don't think there's any more puns this whole video, but there's also no more cards. So I think we pretty much reached the end here. Let me know how you felt about all these picks down there in the comment section there, and anything that you would have put on your list. This... Again, I had to cut like 4 cards from this list. This probably could have been a top 20 sleepers. Even though it was kind of tough to find certain things, there were some cards I wanted to shine a light on here that I ultimately decided were probably not good enough. So let me know down there in the comments like what you would have put on the list, how you feel about these picks and all that stuff. Aside from that, like, subscribe, make sure you hit the bell for notifications because it is almost that time. The next video is going to be the top 20 or 25 cards, top X cards in the set. And then after that, we're going to start doing deck techs and whatnot and having some cool streams and whatnot. So do all this stuff down there. You can support us on Patreon for $1 a month and help us choose the decks that we're doing this season. We've got a Patreon poll going right now with 13 different decks to help pick the first deck of the season. It doesn't end until Wednesday afternoon. So get in there if you want to. It's just $1 a month to participate. And then check out the Twitch streams because I play Magic on the Twitch and you're going to want to see some cool new decks. So do that stuff. But aside from that, I'm donezo for this onezo, I guess. So hit me up in the comment section. Let me know how you felt about it. And I catch you cats later. I'm Deb from the place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.